Don't tell people your problems. I've lived long enough to see how the heart changes, how people change, and how silence becomes one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. There is something I learned not from books, not from lectures, but from years of simply living, watching, and sometimes learning the hard way. And it is this: not every burden you carry is meant to be spoken aloud, not every pain needs an audience, and not every moment of vulnerability should be placed in the hands of others. I say this not from bitterness, but from clarity that only time can give. When you are young, you think speaking everything will lighten your load. But life has a different lesson waiting for you. Some things become heavier the more they are shared with the wrong ears. Over the years, I noticed something about people that I wish I understood earlier. Most people do not listen to understand. They listen to respond, to compare, or sometimes simply to occupy their own curiosity. I've sat across from people who nodded while I spoke, only to realize later they remembered not my pain, but the details they could repeat to someone else. There are those who listen because your struggle makes them feel less alone, and there are those who listen because your struggle makes them feel better about their own life. Very few listen with the kind of stillness that holds your words without distortion. That kind of listening is rare, almost sacred. And when something is rare, it should not be handed out carelessly. I learned, sometimes painfully, that telling the wrong person your problems does not release them, it redistributes them. It spreads them into places where they do not belong. I have seen my own words come back to me changed, reshaped, stripped of intention. I have seen concerns I spoke in confidence become entertainment in another conversation. And I have also seen something quieter but equally damaging. People using my vulnerability as a quiet measure of themselves, comparing, judging, or secretly feeling relief that the suffering belonged to me and not them. That is not cruelty in the dramatic sense people imagine. It is human imperfection. But understanding that imperfection teaches you caution. It teaches you that privacy is not isolation, it is protection. And protecting your inner world is one of the first forms of maturity. There is a difference I had to learn between sharing and spilling. Sharing is deliberate, it is chosen. It happens in spaces where trust has been built slowly, not assumed quickly. Spilling, on the other hand, happens when emotion takes over judgment, when exhaustion speaks louder than wisdom, when the need to be understood overrides the need to be safe. I have done both in my life, and I can tell you they lead to very different outcomes. Sharing can bring relief and even healing. Spilling often brings regret, not because your pain was wrong, but because the container you placed it in was not strong enough to hold it. And once something is spoken, it no longer belongs only to you. That is a truth many learn too late. With time, I also began to understand discernment, not as distrust of everyone, but as respect for my own peace. You begin to notice who handles your words gently and who carries them carelessly. You begin to feel, almost instinctively, who deserves access to your inner world and who does not. I stopped believing that everyone close to me needed full access to my thoughts. Some people are meant to walk beside you, not inside you. And when you start respecting that boundary, something shifts quietly. Life becomes less noisy. The emotional storms become fewer. You begin to understand that silence is not emptiness. It is space for clarity to grow. In that space, solitude begins to feel less like loneliness and more like instruction. I do not mean isolation in the harsh sense, but those private seasons where no one can fix things for you, where no voice can override your own, where you are left to sit with your thoughts until they become understandable again. Those seasons shaped me more than any advice I ever received. I learned how I speak to myself when no one is watching. I learned where my fears live. I learned that I was capable of enduring more than I ever gave myself credit for. And I learned something else that I carry with me still. You are not always meant to be rescued. Some moments are designed so you can discover that you are still standing even when no one comes. Out of that solitude, something quieter begins to grow. You stop performing strength for others and start building it privately. You stop announcing your progress and begin noticing it in the way you respond differently to the same situations. You begin to realize that not every improvement needs recognition, not every healing needs witnesses, and not every transformation needs to be explained. There were periods in my life when nothing looked different on the outside, but everything was changing within me. My reactions softened. My patience deepened. My need to justify myself slowly weakened. And in that quiet development, I began to understand a kind of peace that does not depend on being understood by others, but on understanding myself more honestly than ever before. And it is from that place that something even deeper begins to emerge. Something about how much of ourselves we feel obligated to explain to the world, and whether that habit truly serves us at all. There came a point in my life when I started noticing how much of my energy was being spent not on living, not on healing, but on explaining myself. Explaining why I felt tired, explaining why I made certain choices, explaining why I needed space or silence or time. And I began to ask myself a very simple question that changed everything quietly. Why do I believe I owe this level of access to everyone who asks for it? Because if you live long enough, you realize that not every question is asked with care. Some questions are asked out of curiosity, some out of control, and some out of a need to pull you back into versions of yourself you have already outgrown. I learned that explanations, when given too freely, can become a kind of invitation. Not an invitation to understand, but an invitation to judge, to debate, to reinterpret your life from a distance you never agreed to. I used to believe that if I explained myself clearly enough, people would understand me better. But life showed me something different. Some people do not misunderstand you because you are unclear. They misunderstand you because clarity is not what they are looking for. So I stopped treating every misunderstanding as something I had to fix. I started accepting that being misunderstood is sometimes simply the cost of being honest. And something very interesting happens when you stop over-explaining your life. Your inner world becomes quieter. You begin to notice how often you used words to fill spaces that didn't need filling. You start to feel the difference between communication that builds connection and communication that is driven by anxiety. Because when explanations come from fear, they never end. There is always another layer, another justification, another attempt to be accepted. But when you speak from peace, your words become simpler. They become complete on their own. They do not beg for agreement. Over time, I also realized that peace grows in the same direction that explanations decrease. Not because silence is always the answer, but because unnecessary justification slowly erodes your sense of self. You begin to shape your life around reactions instead of values. You start adjusting your truth to avoid discomfort in others. And without noticing it, you become more focused on being approved of than being aligned with yourself. That is a heavy price to pay for being understood. There is a kind of strength that develops when you stop trying to convince everyone of your intentions. You begin to trust your own judgment more deeply. You no longer feel the need to present evidence for every boundary you set. You simply set it calmly, without apology. And at first, people may push back. They may ask more questions, demand more reasons, try to pull you back into old patterns where you used to explain everything. But if you hold steady, something changes. Not in them necessarily, but in you. You stop negotiating your own peace. I also came to understand that clarity is not the same as explanation. Clarity is calm. Clarity is grounded. Clarity is saying, "This is what I need," and allowing that to stand on its own. Explanation often carries an undercurrent of tension, as if you are still trying to earn permission for your needs to exist. And I wish someone had told me earlier in life that your needs do not require permission. They require honesty, not defense. As years passed, I noticed something else. The people who truly care about you rarely demand long explanations. They may ask questions, yes, but they are not interrogating your life. They are not trying to dismantle your choices. They trust your voice, even when it is brief. And those are the relationships that feel lighter, more respectful, more stable. You do not leave those conversations feeling drained. You leave them feeling seen. And I began to appreciate something even deeper. The quiet dignity of simply living without constant justification. Waking up and making choices without feeling the need to broadcast the reasoning behind them. Resting without explaining exhaustion. Saying no without building a case around it. Changing without defending the transformation. There is a kind of freedom in that which is difficult to describe, but once you feel it, you recognize how much unnecessary weight you were carrying before. In my later years, I started to understand peace not as something you find once, but something you protect repeatedly. Every time you choose not to over-explain, you are protecting it. Every time you resist the urge to justify what your heart already knows, you are strengthening it. And slowly, life becomes less about managing how others perceive you, and more about how honestly you can live with yourself when no one is watching. So, if I could leave you with anything from all the years I have lived, it would be this. Your silence is not an absence of truth. Your boundaries are not an absence of kindness. And your refusal to over-explain is not an absence of connection. It is often the beginning of a deeper kind of peace, one that does not depend on being understood by everyone, but on being steady within yourself. And with that, I want to thank you for listening and spending this time with me. I hope these words gave you something useful to carry forward in your own life. Wherever you are in the world, take care of yourself, move gently through your day, and I wish you peace in everything you are working through. Goodbye for now.